For a period of approximately 4 months between September and December of 2018, I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as the Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC Lavalin. These events involved 11 people, excluding myself and my political staff, from the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, and the office of the Minister of Finance.
I strongly maintain, as I have from the beginning, that I and my staff always acted appropriately and professionally. I therefore completely disagree with the former Attorney General's characterization of events. Our government will always focus on jobs and our economy.
Well, hello all, and welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast. This is Kevin Olenek. You can follow me on Twitter at KVOLE. Find me on Facebook, Kevin Olenek. Like Agree or Disagree, the podcast on Facebook. You can listen on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes and Spotify, or go on Spreaker.com, KVOLE as well. And it has been one of the more interesting weeks of Canadian politics that we have had in a really long time. It has been as a 4-hour testimony outlining Jody Wilson-Rayboud's accusing of the federal Liberals of inappropriately pressuring her on SNC Lavalin had turned Canada on its ears for a couple of days. We had pundits, social media, news, commented, questioned, analyzed, interpreted, and even politicized the event. Some have wanted Justin Trudeau to resign. Some are okay. Others have some different opinions. One like Heather Malick would suggest that this is nothing more than a puff piece. But our guest today actually may disagree with that. We have a writer of a interesting blog, but we'll read a little bit. He is not too left. He is not too right. Just right in the center. He is the president of Red Shoe Nord Lab. He is the stirrer of pots. He is a free agent. He is Robbie Kreger-Smith. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. And then we also have, I don't know if she is sitting to the left or the right of Robbie, but she is a political geek, an advocate for sexual violence survivors, and recently a cabinet member of My United Way. Congratulations, Kristin Raworth, and how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm told, by the way, we cannot talk about the weather because they are sitting in freezing cold Edmonton, and I am sitting in lovely, beautiful, warm weather of Richmond, BC. So that's it. We're not talking about the weather. They told me to shut up already. So I can't break it up anymore. I'm going to read a little bit of what Robbie had to write, and we'll start from here, and we'll just start to unpack what has happened this week. With Wilson-Rayboud's detailed testimony and documentation of phone calls, meetings, and discussions that were presented in her testimony to the Justice Committee, the former AG and Justice Minister established her credibility in a compelling manner. The Prime Minister's media availability in response to Wilson-Rayboud's testimony was an unmitigated disaster. For the Prime Minister to step in front of the microphones following the second set of allegations of inappropriate behavior and state that the woman has got it wrong, and he perceived it to be different, has shown that he has lost the plot. He goes on to say that justifying allowing a corporate corruption to get off without prosecution for the serious charges that are facing in order to protect jobs damages the reputation Canada has for being a country ruled by law and justice. So we've had a few days to kind of unpack what has happened, and maybe we'll start with what your instant reaction is and what your reaction is now. And I'll let you guys start, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, so I'll jump in, and obviously I wrote the blog immediately following the Prime Minister's media availability, where he responded, and my background and my most recent political involvement involves crisis communications and communications consulting. And one of the most important things to do when you're facing a crisis is to get in front of it. If you have some culpability or some blame, to acknowledge your role in that situation and not to make excuses or try and deflect. And by the Prime Minister's own admission, when he stepped in front of the media and almost immediately following Wilson-Rayboud's testimony, he said that he hadn't heard it all, but he disagreed with it. And he didn't really have any evidence. He didn't have details. He didn't have information that really backed up his disagreement with what she had said. And when you look at 4 hours of testimony and questioning, and Jody Wilson-Rayboud had detailed dates, information, people that were involved, who talked to who, what the venue that the discussions happened in. It just really seemed very reactive and defensive, and it didn't seem like the Prime Minister was responding from a place of credibility or authenticity. It was really more about trying to undermine the character of Jody Wilson-Rayboud and defending it based upon his own perceptions, not her detailed account of what did happen.
And it was very staged, too. I mean, if you look at it, he walked out with his daughter and with the new MP from the Outremont riding who had won 2 days earlier. You know, he had the MP standing behind him the whole time. A lot of it was very much about trying to be consistent with the image of Trudeau as a feminist, the image of Trudeau as this sort of sunny ways, all of this stuff. And it's inconsistent with the attitude that we've seen taken by our Prime Minister, not just in this specific case, but over the last 4 years in terms of not being able to live up to his own hype.
And they were, if you watch on YouTube, that they were standing out there for 20 minutes until he came out. It was like a 10-minute, 10 to 13-minute conversation. I was just like, oh my gosh, like did Grade 9ers do this? Like, what are you thinking? It was, it was quite something. Kristin, you have been very vocal on Twitter about Justin Trudeau and his, I don't want to put words in your mouth, his fake feminism or his sunny ways. Can we expand on this and how you're seeing this? And
yeah, for sure. So, I mean, part of that for me is my own personal experience, having come forward last year around MP Canterre and my experiences, and then having basically been stonewalled from the PMO in terms of getting the report on my harassment, being consistently refused access to a report about me and about my own experiences. So that's where I come from when I have this conversation. And then part of that is that you see time and time and time again that there's a version of feminism that Justin Trudeau puts out there, but if you do not line up with that specific definition as he sees it, then you aren't deemed a feminist and you aren't considered part of the conversation. He's been incredibly divisive in some of these conversations around women's issues, and so that's part of my issue. And then when you look at his treatment of Jody Wilson-Rayboud, the way that he referred to her as Jody in one of the press conferences, but every other MP was called Minister of, Minister this, Minister that, or by their last name. It's a consistent amount of disrespect that he puts towards women that doesn't line up with his belief system, as he frames it.
Robbie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Kristin, to be honest, there. I have no doubt that the Prime Minister believes he's a feminist and that he certainly has a vision of what feminism looks like and how he can help support it. But I think sometimes it's a little bit less than altruistic, and the actions don't necessarily match the words. And so the feminism sometimes can be a little bit politically expedient, and it's not really rooted in genuine behaviors and actions when it's not politically convenient.
And it's easy to call yourself a feminist. It's another thing to actually step up and stand up for the things that you say when it hurts your, quote unquote, your party brand. And I think you have seen that with his unwillingness initially to kick Desange out of the party, who was an MP who had been accused of serious allegations of sexual assault. Canterra is still in caucus. You see, again, his behavior around these issues around Me Too and the way he's responded, and it's just been consistently not in line with what he says he believes in.
Yeah. What has also come up a bit that has been interesting, we'll unpack this even more. There was a really interesting question period for Michelle Rempel on this as well, where she really took him and the Liberal Party to task as well, which I thought was you can say love or hate Michelle Rempel what you want, but she does stand in a passion of fire when you piss her off. Yeah, it's she very much believes in what she believes in, and I totally respect that. But one of the things that has also come up from those that are defending Trudeau, or defending, kind of in a sense, there's the defending of Trudeau or not wanting to get off the hook, but taking some challenge to Jody Wilson-Rayboud is some have believed that this was about her performance. They point back to things like what she said about Colton Boushie back when that trial happened, some other decisions that she has made. Do you see this being a bit about her performance, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's garbage. If it had anything to do with her performance, that would have come up before now. I mean, I was under the impression it was Scott Bryson's fault.
Oh, yeah.
So, or that she wasn't bilingual, or that it wasn't even... The problem is with the messaging with the Prime Minister's office, they cannot be consistent in their messaging. One day it's one thing, another day it's another thing. If it was actually a performance issue back when they moved her to Veterans Affairs, then they would have said that at the time, or it would have been, or they wouldn't have even given her an additional cabinet post. Because that's the other thing, is what's lost in this is this conversation around Veterans Affairs is an extremely important position. And so if she was so difficult to work with, or a performance issue, why put her in a position where you are responsible for taking care of the men and women who fight for us every single day?
Yeah, and I've certainly heard from some supporters, both of the Prime Minister as well as members of other parties, that there was some concerns with the performance of Jody Wilson-Rayboud as the Justice Minister. But I think one of the things with politics is perception is reality. And just the same as some people are criticizing Wilson-Rayboud for not having stepped down when she felt that she was having inappropriate pressure applied, if she was so bad at the job previously, why would you give her another cabinet position? And why would you make that decision when push came to shove for a potential DPA agreement with SNC Lavalin? And so even if there isn't any truth to the matter that they are trying to push a DPA, the timing of pushing Wilson-Rayboud out of the position definitely lends credence to the perception that there is some interference going on. And then the subsequent admission by the new Justice Minister that was one of the first things discussed in his mandate meeting definitely gives credibility to Wilson-Rayboud's belief that was part of the reason for moving her out.
And if they genuinely didn't believe that they'd done anything wrong, Joe Butts would still have a job.
Yes, and he resigned quite quickly, although he's wanting to step in and testify now. What are we thinking there?
Well, I think with him coming forward, strategically and politically, I think there's a lot of risk. And if he doesn't come in as prepared and meticulously able to document conversations that happened, what the content were, then he really runs the risk of pouring more gasoline on this fire and continuing the narrative even further.
And I think the other part of that, too, is that the Conservatives and the NDP are going to have to be very cautious in how they approach this. One of the biggest criticisms that came out of Jody Wilson-Rayboud's testimony was the actions of Liberal MPs, specifically Randy Boissonnault, and the way that he approached her. So the Conservatives, just strategically, the Conservatives and the NDP are going to have to be very cautious to not come across equally, if not more, aggressive when Joe Butts comes to speak, they have to try to play this the best way that they can, which is to be respectful and to listen and act in the same way with him as they did before.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because very clearly on social media there feels like there's a bit of a shocking on Twitter. There's a divide. Who knew?
That's so surprising.
Yeah, it's utterly stunning. It's shocking, but it's very clear that there's this huge divide, and you have to, how to play that out in the public. Is there now? Okay, Robbie, you touched on this a little bit, but the other criticism from some is if this was an ethical breach, if she knew all of this, she should have resigned. It feels kind of, in my personal opinion, it feels like a real, like, easy to sit here in an armchair position to say, like, well, why didn't you do this if you, like, it feels kind of a snarky, backhanded slap and not understanding what Jody Wilson-Rayboud went through. Am I misunderstanding this, or?
Well, like most things, I don't think it's quite black and white. And so one of the things that Jody Wilson-Rayboud talks about and references is a concept called the Shawcross principle, which basically states both that an attorney general / justice minister, if they feel that there has been political interference or undue political pressure, that they have a responsibility to resign and then to publicly criticize and go after the prime minister and their leadership. Now, obviously, Wilson-Rayboud felt very strongly that the prosecution of SNC should proceed, and I think that you do need to take her at her word that she felt that she had done an adequate job of pushing off that political pressure and that she was going to be able to see this case through to completion and to the outcome that she believes should occur, which is an actual trial on the charges that have been leveled against them. So I don't think it's quite as black and white as some people would have you believe. I do think that there was pressure, and in her own words, she does say that she doesn't think necessarily that the Prime Minister or the people in the Privy Council office or the staff have done anything illegal. She does feel that they were skirting that line. But the thing that stood out for me is that political considerations, economic considerations can and should be part of the discussion, but they need to be occurring prior to a decision being made on whether or not to pursue prosecution. And once the Department of Public Prosecutions and herself had firmly made that decision, that's when the political pressure and political discussions should have stopped. And that's what makes this inappropriate, is she had made very, very clear to everybody who approached her that she was firm that that was the correct course of action. And so in pushing back and drawing that line in the sand, that's where the line was crossed, was that there continued to be a concerted effort from chiefs of staff, from the principal secretary, from the finance minister's staff, from the Privy Council and Michael Wernick. And so that's where the lines were crossed. And certainly if it wasn't illegal, it sounds to me like it was unethical.
Well, and I think the other part of this, and I think we need to go back a little bit, to remember how Jody Wilson-Rayboud got involved in politics to begin with. She was a chief in BC. She became part of this as part of the contingent of chiefs that came to Ottawa for the I Don't Know More conversations. She really came into the political realm wanting to affect change. So very likely when she was looking at the options of what she was going to do, when she found out that she was going to be removed as Attorney General, she still probably wanted to, like all politicians do when they initially get elected, to make change and to create change for her community and for the things that matter to her. So I don't blame her at all for wanting to stay and wanting to look at whether or not there was an opportunity to affect change still in her new role. And she has not been granted a waive of privilege to communicate what happened after she got moved. So we don't know at this point what led to her decision to actually resign as Minister for Veterans Affairs. But something had obviously had to have happened in that period of time that led to that initially. But she probably still went into that portfolio with a certain sense of hope.
Yeah. And I think there was a little bit of naivety on the part of the Prime Minister when he said, if Jody Wilson-Rayboud didn't have confidence in myself as Prime Minister or in the course of action that we've taken, she would have stepped down. And the fact that she stepped down the next day, I think that's really telling as to where her head was at and the level of trust and belief in the Prime Minister and his team.
Well, and the other part of this, too, is that every single thing that has come out of the Liberal PMO on this goes against what you're supposed to do in positions of workplace harassment. To say, okay, well, you're being bullied, go talk to the person who's bullying you and tell them to stop. Oh, you should just quit. Oh, you should. None of that is what you're supposed to do in situations of workplace bullying. And that's what, if you really want to drill this down to its most simplistic elements, that's what this is. It's bullying.
Exactly. And anybody that has been through a workplace bullying situation can relate to what Jody Wilson-Rayboud has done, is going through, because it's tough. Every day is a little bit different. Maybe one day it feels like, oh, everything is fine, and the next day it's not. So in your head, you're going through this process. It's not so easy for me to say, oh, she should have resigned or she should have done this and that. It's easy to say that looking out. But when you're in this, and you're right, I think that she has some values, and even her dad has been talking about how she has been brought up.
That's another thing, sorry, just to interject.
Yeah.
I really, really hate that the media wants to go to her dad or any other male figure around her to give her some sense of credence. Like, oh, see, her dad said this. She doesn't need a male figure to speak for her. She's perfectly capable of speaking for herself. And I don't think that we need to continue to rely on interviews with her dad, who in and of itself, he's a chief. He did incredible work in BC, especially fighting, ironically, the Trudeau government on their position on the white paper and what they wanted to do in terms of getting rid of treaties. But he isn't her, and I think we as the broader we need to stop having conversations about her that automatically brings in the men around her to give her position some value.
Yeah, I wonder if that's in part because here in BC he's such an easy contact because he's been everywhere as well. I'm not disagreeing with you, but like one of the things that I was taken away that he said, because I mean I'm learning a little bit more about her, is just her value system, which I do appreciate, right? And I mean, you know, she's limited in what she can say, so I guess that's where we're getting that value. But I think that her value system and what she wants to do and what her motivation or her focus is it's not as easy as I'm just going to quit. There's more to this than that what is meeting the eye.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the other controversies, we'll get into the other political parties in a moment, but one of the things that is coming out, and Heather, I feel like Heather Malik is one of the key people. There's a bunch of other people that have talked about this that don't feel that what has happened here is that big of a deal. And in the risk of jobs, 9,000 jobs, what's happened here to get jobs, it's a small price to pay. But then what happened with Huawei out here in BC, what are we thinking? Is this a big deal? Is there some contradiction here? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it is a big deal, and certainly China has some vested interest in trying to embarrass Trudeau into interfering and letting Meng Wanzhou off the hook, quote unquote. But fundamentally, when you look at this, it is a matter of rule of law, and the deferred prosecution agreement is new legislation in Canada. It was just passed and implemented in the fall of 2018. And so it definitely seems like there's an element of political interference and a desire to protect a beloved Quebec company, granted one that's widely acknowledged to be a fairly corrupt one as well. And there's similar legislation to this in the majority of the Western world, but I would challenge and argue whether there's value in having it, because what you're really doing is you're saying to big corporations and to C-level executives that it's okay to commit white-collar crime because, you'll just send in the legal team and we'll negotiate your way out of it under the guise of protecting jobs in the economy. And so I think as a society, we do need to take a look at, does this type of legislation make sense? Do these type of agreements make sense? And why do we have them? And should there be a different set of rules for corporations and businesses versus, Joe Canada? Because if we were to be bribing people and paying people off, you can bet your butt that we would be facing criminal charges and there would be no special agreement for us.
Well, and I think I have 3 points to make on this. I mean, firstly, over the last couple of months, everything's going on between Canada and China around Huawei. And then you have their foreign affairs ministry tweeting out, I thought Trudeau believed in the rule of law. And that's been his rationale for not interfering in this particular case. So when we're getting owned by China on Twitter, that's probably not a very good sign for us. Secondly, what is consistently forgotten in this conversation is SNC Lavalin is basically like LexCorp. Like, you're talking about an organization that procured prostitutes for the Gaddafis, that built torture chambers in Libya. They are not this, good little organization that made one little mistake and let's give them some space there. That is not the case whatsoever. So, and there are a lot of other really good engineering companies out there that have not done those things. So maybe we could put our energy into those. And then thirdly, I don't think there is any Albertan, regardless of where you stand on the issues of the pipeline, who didn't get some visceral reaction to hearing Trudeau talk about jobs and how important it is to save 8,000 jobs in the province of Quebec, when we have not seen that same commitment in this province around whether it's TMX or whether it's anything else in terms of his commitment to this province and jobs here. That does not exist.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Well, first of all, your point about Gaddafi, let's not forget what this guy did. This is not a nice human being. They have committed some really horrible things, this should not, and that should not be passed. I totally agree with that. And the Alberta thing is very, I know that some people are going to sit here and say, well, Alberta is feeling entitled, and Alberta this, and Alberta, the fact of the matter is, and you guys know this more than me because you're living there, it's tough right now. There are a lot of people that are unemployed that maybe were employed. It is tough to get work. It's tough to, downtown Calgary is a shell of what it was. Although you're living in Edmonton, it's not easy for a lot of Albertans right now. So to hear people in Quebec or Justin Trudeau doing this about 9,000 jobs in Quebec, if I'm an Albertan, yeah, you're right. I don't think you have to sit on one side of the fence or the other to feel a little bit of what are you thinking here? Seriously? It feels wrong.
Well, again, it just goes against everything that Justin Trudeau campaigned on. But if you look at the reality between campaigning in 2015 to what he has done as a government now, we still sell arms to Saudi Arabia. So we are not exactly sitting there as moral authorities on what we do and do not with government policy. And SNC Lavalin is just one more example of that.
Okay. Robbie, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I'll acknowledge I was born and grew up in BC. I know, sacrilege. But I've been an Albertan for 24 years now, and I'm an Albertan by choice. I love it here, and it's given me a lot of opportunity. I'll acknowledge, though, that Trudeau, yes, he bought a pipeline. Yes, he's done some things to support Albertans who haven't been working. But when you look at the way he has allegedly according to the testimony of Jody Wilson-Rayboud, twisted himself into knots to protect 8,000 jobs in Quebec and bringing up an impending election and how important it is that SNC Lavalin is there. Whereas when it's come down to supporting energy infrastructure for Alberta, it feels a little bit like he's had to be dragged to that position and he hasn't willingly done it. Whereas in this case, he's really been very proactive in going after that opportunity and the political opportunity that represents. And so for me, that's where there's this bit of cognitive dissonance and why I think a lot of Albertans are feeling really chapped about this situation.
And there's already a section of Albertans that don't like Trudeau, no matter what he does anyway. So that just
it wouldn't matter if he was giving out free cars.
That last name doesn't resonate with some people, no matter what.
Yeah. So it's just not hurting. It's not helping him in any way, shape, or form, or helping.
But that's the problem. Is I think that he, whether rightly or wrongly, sees he has 3 seats in Alberta. They have a huge seat selection in Quebec and in Ontario, and that's what they push towards because he doesn't see this as a winnable province for him. So I think to some extent, why would he make us a priority?
Yeah. And on that front, I think that's where sometimes Albertans shoot themselves in the foot by being so loyal to the Conservatives is sometimes your political clout is diminished by our election almost always being fait accompli. It's going to be a Conservative majority. There's not a lot of incentive for a Liberal government to do things that politically support us.
Well, and then he also, not to take this completely off the rails in terms of discussion, but then he also is basically sacrificing Amarjeet Sohi by making him the minister in charge of Trans Mountain. And, for Amarjeet, he was a very well-liked, well-respected politician. You hand him a file like that, that's political suicide in a lot of ways. So, there needs to be a consideration on Trudeau's part about the way he plays his MPs. And for the exception of what happened in the last few days, Randy Beausseau should have been in cabinet from day one. So it's moves that he makes, it doesn't resonate well, I think, with the Alberta voters either.
Yeah. It's not easy, and I don't. He's not necessarily going to find it very easy out here, necessarily in BC either. He made some promises to the anti-pipeline people that they're not very happy either. So it's not going to be easy for him out west, no matter what, how he looks at it. I don't think.
Well, and I think it speaks a little bit to Trudeau's desire to be well-liked versus being respected. And there's a much larger focus, I believe, on the image and a much smaller focus on the substance that goes with it. Yeah. And so I think that it's going to make a pathway to forming government again a lot harder for him.
And up until this point, I haven't been the hugest Jagmeet Singh cheerleader, but if there's any time for Jagmeet to stand up and shine, this is his opportunity now. He will be in the House. He's won his seat, and he has been consistently much more reasoned in his approach to this than Andrew Scheer, in the sense of calling for inquiry, not flat out asking for the Prime Minister to resign. This is his chance, and if he does have an opportunity, BC's wide open for him in terms of votes and opportunities there. So he's the person to watch coming out of this, because he has the most to gain, because people are not necessarily going to go from being Liberal supporters to voting for their Conservative MP, but they could potentially, like they did previously in previous years under Jack Layton and the NDP, put their vote there for the time being.
Yeah, it's going to be. Yeah, that was kind of wanted to. Yeah, let's go there. Like we started with Jagmeet. It's congratulations on winning your seat, and look what you got here, and we have a present for you. Kind of the public inquiry. Like I do agree. I think there's some reasonable things coming out of there. I mean, on a side note, maybe he just doesn't talk about Venezuela at all. You just leave that alone and you just focus on stuff like this. And I think that there is an underrated opportunity for the NDP. I think it's really sad that they're losing some really good people in that party like Nathan Cullen. I don't think that hurts them, but I think, and what Nathan Cullen has done in this, I think, has been very, very good too. But yeah, I've seen the NDP. You maybe contrast what you're seeing from Singh and what Andrew Scheer's calling for a resignation and how the Conservatives are handling this.
Yeah, for Andrew Scheer to run out hair on fire as soon as Wilson-Rayboud was done testifying and calling for resignation just seemed a little bit opportunistic and a little bit like an ambulance chaser. And obviously the Conservatives smell blood in the water and believe there's an opportunity here politically for them. But it did come across as really opportunistic. It came across as not having all the facts before they were jumping to conclusions. And politically, I think that this is probably going to wind up damaging Trudeau very much, and that it may wind up ending with him having to step down. But I think you have to have all the information first, and you can't be jumping to conclusions like that so quickly without hearing from all the stakeholders and all the people that have been involved and getting a fulsome picture in a nonpartisan and non-biased way.
I mean, that said, I heard Andrew Scheer on the Ryan Jesperson show, I think it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, and he actually came across much more reasoned and better spoken in that interview than he had in his press conference immediately after Jody Wilson-Rayboud's testimony. I think this is a huge opportunity for both Jagmeet Singh and Andrew Scheer. Actually, ironically, Robbie and I were talking about this on the way before the podcast started, that Scheer has in some ways gone quite right in a way to combat Maxime Bernier. And I think this particular opportunity, for lack of a better word, is a chance for Scheer to come more center and bring the party more center in their messaging, and this is a chance for him to show Canadians what he would be if he was their prime minister, because ultimately he is the other option. Like, I don't think anyone except for very passionate NDPers believe that there's any other option other than between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer. So this is an opportunity for Scheer to do that and to show us what kind of a measured leader he can be, which is exactly what Stephen Harper did during the sponsorship scandal. And it is what made people, I think, feel comfortable giving him a minority government.
Yeah, it's very, very parallel in that sense. I just, I worry about that because I don't know if, I feel like maybe it's the whole perception, but I feel like Scheer is afraid to go to the middle. I feel like he's catering to the right part of the Conservative base, and if he loses that, he's going to lose his leadership. And I feel like his leadership is tenuous at best anyway.
I think people say that, but I mean, the reality is now that Max has his People's Party and does all his ridiculous nonsense, he can take those ridiculous people. Like, I don't think the Conservative Party want people who believe that the UN is going to take over Canada in 10 years, which is what Maxime Bernier said today. I think you have people within the party like Lisa Raitt, Michelle Rempel, people who have traditionally been more center. I think that Conservative parties all across the board play to the right before the election and then play to the center in the general. If you look at what Harper did with that party, it was the exact same thing. He ran a center party. He did not run the right-wing party that a lot of people, I think, even wanted in terms of social conservatism and in terms of the way that he went with a lot of things. He was pretty centery. He was pretty close to what a Paul Martin government would have looked like as well. Yeah. So I don't know if we need to necessarily be afraid of Andrew Scheer, but I think this is this opportunity for him to address those kind of fears that you and I'm sure a lot of other people, and I know Twitter does, have around him and what he may do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if I was advising Scheer, I would really be focusing on having him come across as being prime ministerial, being the reasoned level head. And because you do have Maxime Bernier peeling off some of those more extreme right-wing people, this is an opportunity for the Conservatives to pick up the blue liberal vote that has been with Justin Trudeau, but do want a little bit more fiscal sanity, that do want a little bit more focus on smaller government, but are socially progressive. because those are the people that are more likely to come to the Conservatives versus going to Jagmeet Singh, who is quite left-wing on matters of the environment and economics.
I like to refer to it as the Joe Clark vote.
Yes. It's fair to bring in Joe Clark in a podcast.
I like to bring him into all things.
Yes, all things. Yes. you love Joe Clark. Yes.
Yeah.
Joe Clark is Kristin's every Man Crush Monday.
It's true.
It's true. Yeah.
In a normal way.
Oh, that's fair. I'm not going to judge. I think you're right. I see where you're coming from. We missed Joe Clark. You pinned it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What like we talked a little bit. Jagmeet's not going to form government, but he's got a lot going against him though too, in the sense that he's not really well known. I know that there are some NDP folks that are concerned that he's not going to get a fair shake, unfortunately, because of who he is. If you're advising Jagmeet, what do you say?
Find a time machine, go back 18 months and run in a by-election.
Yeah.
So Canadians can get to know you. I think with Jagmeet, the problem is that he's just seemed so passive, and he hasn't been able to articulate a clear vision for what the NDP looks like under his leadership. And so not having the profile of being in the House of Commons, not being active enough in building his profile, and even just, you referenced Venezuela earlier, not being able to take a clear position and articulate it. And he's been a little bit wishy-washy, and that hasn't helped his cause at all.
Well, and to build off of that, there's no caucus loyalty. You have him tweeting out something and then Nikki Ashton tweeting out something disagreeing with him. There has been issues with party loyalty, for lack of a better word, around his decision to kick Aaron Weir out of caucus, which, by the way, is one of my preferred decisions that Jagmeet Singh has made in terms of his consistency on issues around sexual harassment. It shows a lot more courage around this issue than our Prime Minister has shown. But that is a big issue. Again, you can't go 18 months back in time to be able to control things. All you can do now moving forward is, I think, what he did the other day. He's been consistent. He's been clear. In the last couple of days, I've gained a lot more respect for Jagmeet Singh and the way that he's come across and handled this situation. And so I think we just have to see now moving forward what the party's going to do. But what they also have to do is get out there and start recruiting some damn star candidates, because they've lost Murray Rankin, they've lost Nathan Cullen. In Alberta, they've lost Linda Duncan. They really need to start ensuring that who they are running in the next election are capable of winning those seats back for them.
Yeah. There's a small minority of them, but I guess we should ask, what about Elizabeth May? Because if you're doomed with the NDP, if you don't want to go to the Liberals, maybe the Green Party is a better fit. Is there an opportunity here? Or
I think there is, and I think if you look at the last British Columbia election, I think if you look at the current polling in PEI, you're seeing non-traditional parties starting to have a bigger influence on politics. And I would argue to a certain extent it actually started in Saskatchewan under Brad Wall. But you're starting to see parties that don't necessarily fit in the traditional left-right paradigm that are starting to pop up. And while I don't politically agree with a lot of Elizabeth May's stances, particularly around balancing environment and economic development, it's hard to argue that she has been a very effective legislator. She's been recognized numerous times as one of the best MPs in the House, and she works her butt off, and she's certainly knowledgeable. And even looking at her questioning of Jody Wilson-Rayboud, it was measured, but it was articulate. It hit the right points, and so I do believe there is an opportunity for her if she puts together a good slate of candidates and they run broadly enough that they can pick up some of that more progressive /environmentalist vote.
Yeah, God bless Elizabeth May. I don't agree with probably much the same things that Robbie does in terms of her political positions. But she was just voted the most ethical leader of a federal party. I mean, I think people like her. I think people respect her. There's no lying in Elizabeth May. She is who she is, and she's very, very, very honest about that. So I do think that this represents an opportunity for her. And you look even at the states, at the popularity of people like AOC and the Green New Deal and Bernie Sanders and all of these things. Elizabeth May speaks to the same people that would vote that way. So if she's able to coalesce her messaging, but also if she's able to get the kind of platform that is allotted to Jagmeet Singh and Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau, because again, what we see sometimes is she doesn't get invited to leadership debates, or she only gets invited to some. The national media doesn't cover her the same way. So I think it's really about her finding a platform and an opportunity to get her message out to people. If I was advising her, that's what I would be telling her to get on Twitter, get on Facebook, get on Instagram, be out there so people can see you, because the media will not give you that same privilege.
Yeah, it's true. Now, let's get to the social media. I want to get to the social media and the language that has been used around this. Some of the comparisons here, some of the wording here. What are your thoughts on the social media conversation? It's hard. There is always going to be the partisans that are going to be partisan no matter what, and will take a side no matter what. But there's also, and I respect both of you because you are nonpartisan on this, and you're not about the party line. You're about the actual issue. So can you guys talk about what you're seeing in the language there? What you would like to see more of? Kristin talked a little bit like, we don't necessarily need to hear a male perspective kind of thing, or Bill Wilson specifically's perspective, but kind of talk a little bit about the language that you're seeing here and you'd like to hear more of.
My thing is, I would really like it, and I think I said this on Twitter the other day, is if people would stop comparing political interference to sexual harassment and sexual assault, and using that kind of language, and consistently bringing in conversations. And this is obviously from a partisan perspective, I think, of conservatives, bringing in Gropergate and the incident that happened with Mr. Trudeau 20 years ago. That's not relevant to this conversation at all. Bringing that into this conversation, bringing that kind of gendered language into this conversation, it minimizes sexual assault, and it also minimizes political interference. These are two very separate issues. And I think we need to start having those conversations and not using language that has been typically used to talk about sexual violence when we use her truth and all of these things for this. I think we need to really start. They are not the same thing. And that's something that I found frustrating on social media. I mean, social media is a dumpster fire regardless, but that part has been very frustrating to me.
See, and that's where I'm going to kind of disagree with Kristin. And certainly, there's a power structure in politics, and I think that that's where there is some similarity between the Gropergate thing and this situation. And the thing that really stuck out for me, and I think was a communications error on Trudeau's part when he had his press conference following Wilson-Rayboud's testimony, was, well, she perceived it differently than I did. And so there's that kind of paternalistic insinuation there that Trudeau tends to rely on when things aren't going well for him. It's like, oh, well, that woman, that lady, that girl didn't perceive it the way that I did, so she must be wrong. And I think that that's a little bit problematic and kind of hints at that element or perception that Trudeau is kind of a bit of a superficial feminist, right? Because he supports women, he believes women, as long as those women aren't in a position of conflict with him. And so that's where I do see some similarities there.
I will give Robbie that. I will coalesce to his perspective on that.
I've seen some conservative people on my social media use the Me Too. And kind of there's this meme with Jody Wilson-Rayboud with "I believe her." I'm not. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel a little bit uncomfortable about that. Just because I feel like they're taking a political opportunity, and it feels a little demeaning to what that conversation's all about. But maybe am I missing something there? Or?
I mean, I don't feel like the hashtag #MeToo should be part of this conversation. Again, I think that while recognizing, like what Robbie said is absolutely correct, it was a mistake on Trudeau's communications people's part to use the exact same language to describe Jody Wilson that he did to describe the incident at the Kokanee Music Festival. But no, like you can't, if you say hashtag I believe Jody, that's fine, but the Me Too stuff needs to stay out of this conversation because those are two very separate things. And again, I genuinely believe, from what I understand about the PMO and from what I've seen over the last couple of years, they would have done this to Jody Wilson-Rayboud if she was a woman or she was a man. They wanted to get their way, period, the end.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's the other part of this that I'm finding kind of fascinating is an old colleague of mine, Brett Menier, has brought it in my head, and I like this term. It's the whataboutisms. So one side does something, and what about what this did? And so a good example of this has been, Harper is no better, Scheer is no better. Like this whole whataboutism is kind of bothering me because I feel like it's almost like one side's justifying, this is okay because the other party wouldn't have been done any better at this, or this is, it's kind of like almost like a shrug of the shoulder, and it's, whatever, right?
And that's consistent. I mean, we see that in Alberta provincial politics right now quite a lot, that when political parties do things that are wrong, partisans' natural reaction is, okay, but what about this? We need to be able to acknowledge when our team makes mistakes.
Yeah.
That is the number one thing that politics needs in order to get better, is the ability to say, we screwed up, my team screwed up, this is a mistake, let's address this and change this, as opposed to the immediate reaction of refusing to acknowledge or engage in those conversations.
Yeah, for me, it's part of the reason why I don't like being involved in partisan politics, even though I'm very political and very much interested in politics, is that you can't criticize your team because you're seen as weakening the brand or the group, and you can't give credit when another team does something good. And one of the things, like if I was forming government, there'd be a statute of limitations on how long you can blame the previous government for your mistakes and whatnot. Like you've been in position for 6 months now, or in the case of the Trudeau government, going on 4 years. You can't keep blaming Harper for your mistakes, and you can't use the mistakes that they made in government to justify the mistakes that you're making.
Hey, Alberta NDP, can you listen to what Robbie is saying here? Take notes.
And in fairness to the Alberta NDP, it's not just them in Alberta, and you see that from the UCP, you see that from the Alberta Party, not as much, but it's consistent. It's every single government does this. They blame the previous government. Like, I swear to God, the Liberals probably have a giant picture of Stephen Harper, and they just throw things at him every time something goes wrong. It is not Stephen Harper's fault anymore.
Yeah.
And so there is and even on this particular file, Trudeau mentioned Harper in question period. Like, no, unless he's controlling you and telling you what to do, this is not Stephen Harper's fault.
Take ownership, or move forward on this and not blame the other party. But it's kind of a campaign strategy. I mean, it's bold, I guess. It kind of works, but
it's also interesting because on Twitter I've seen a lot of people react and say I might not like what Trudeau did, but Andrew Scheer is just a white national. Like, they just go so far to the other side. And what people don't realize is Twitter is not real life.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people in the world are not polarized that way. They're in the middle, and they care about what happens with their families and their job and their everyday existence. And so this inside baseball stuff is not going to matter to your average Canadian when they go to the polls in October.
No, I don't think so. I think if they go to the polls, that's a whole other question, because I think that there probably is a little bit of cynicism right now towards politics and who to believe and who to trust.
I think that that's the problem with the whataboutism and the tribalism that we have in politics right now, is that people who don't subscribe to or belong to a party, and on average only about 2.5% to 3% of citizens ever purchase a membership in a political party. So you look at 95% plus of our voters aren't subscribed to that tribalism, and when they see it and they see politicians getting off with corrupt practices or interfering in decisions around criminal charges, things like that, what it does is it actually tunes people out of the political process. And what we need to have politicians be accountable for decisions regardless of their partisan stripe. And we need to be able to look at somebody who's on a different political party or political team and say, hey, you know what, you did this really good, more effective. And I think if we did more to encourage politicians and support politicians who acknowledged when a competitor does a good job and also acknowledged when they screwed something up, then people would be more interested in getting involved, supporting, donating, volunteering, and getting out and voting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This leads me to, I do think it's important to talk about the media's role in this as well. And there was a huge story or a huge controversy for those that are not living in Alberta that didn't see a post-media article or a post-media paper that had the UCP do a wrap around what the NDP cuts would mean. And that enraged a lot of people in Alberta, no matter what side that they're on. And there's been a huge controversy. One of the controversies that's come up in this is the role a paper like the Toronto Star has played in this, and how there's some that feel, and one of the conversations is that they're the liberal propaganda. So what is the media's role in this? How, like, not only specifically in this political landscape, how are you feeling about that? I mean, I think that there's a bit of a broader scope in here than specifically Jody Wilson-Rayboud, but I do think it's relevant.
Yeah, and certainly in Alberta politics as well, it's relevant. And there's this perception that the media is biased, and I think inherently a lot of us have biases. But what's an important piece is to be able to acknowledge and show that bias. And there's this blurring that has occurred between columnists who write opinion and reporters who are supposed to write the news. And there is also a separation between reporters and the corporations. And so if you look at the last election, there was post-media pretty much across the board endorsed the Conservative Party, where you had reporters and columnists who were quite pissed off, frankly, about that, because they didn't think that that was the right choice. And so, again, it's not very black and white, but I think sometimes the media does themselves a disservice by blurring those lines. And it's part of the problem with the rise of social media, the rise of podcasting, the rise of blogging is, and I know I'm speaking with forked tongue because I do all these things, you have people that don't have per se a professional background, but they are opinionated and educated or experienced within the political realm, who are now adding commentary, and those lines become more and more blurred every day. And so there does need to be a clear delineation between what is fact-based news and what is opinion/commentary. And I think that you do need to be able to acknowledge and see those biases. And as voters, I know for myself, one of the things I make a point of doing is I try to consume media from various sources that might lean more right-wing and that might lean more left-wing, because they give you a more fulsome picture of what the real truth might be.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that one of my most enjoyable things, and I say that with a little bit of sarcasm, is one of my friends is quite right-wing, And frequently he will send me things on Twitter that are infuriating him, and we'll describe it as liberal bias. And then I will go on Twitter to look at said liberal bias thing and then see tons of comments from people saying that it's right-wing bias. So a lot of this is that people are also responsible, like Robbie said, for having different perspectives and reading different things. But people are going to see what they're going to see. If you write an article saying the UCP have a good approach to human trafficking, and that's all you wrote, people would be like, "You're just a right-wing shill, aren't you?" If you wrote something saying the NDP have decreased child poverty by half since they came into office, you're liberal bias. Like, I think the thing is that a lot of this is that people don't like to have messages put in front of them that challenge their beliefs. And so instead of actually reading something and saying, okay, this is a good piece of policy or this is a good thing that happened, they want to call it out for being a biased report.
And yeah, it's interesting because I think what you guys are trying to say is it's okay for us as human beings to think and not necessarily just accept everything that is in front of us, challenge it, debate it, and it doesn't matter what side it is. Think about it and form your own opinion. You're asking humans to be responsible. This is outrageous. It's quite fascinating because there is such a loud noise. It's, as one of my friends put it, it's whoever speaks the loudest wins sometimes on social media, and that's where that gets through. So it's tough to get into that nuance, I guess. But yeah.
Well, and overall, people just don't like to have their beliefs challenged.
Yeah.
Generally, and I think we all need to be better at being open to having our beliefs challenged and to having a conversation, because I think it fundamentally makes you a better, more well-rounded person to be able to have those conversations. Even if you still walk away believing what you believe, I think you can have a more nuanced perspective on things.
Yeah. So in terms of this, what are, like, if you had Jody Wilson-Rayboud in the room and I had someone from the Liberal government in the room, what are some of your questions that you have going forward?
Oh, that's a good question. I think certainly to be able to answer those questions, we need to hear and see more of, now that Jody Wilson-Rayboud has had the opportunity to, quote unquote, speak her truth, have a response that addresses her concerns. I think that without knowing the content of the conversations that occurred after her departure as the Attorney General and Justice Minister, it's hard to know the full picture and the full story of what did occur here. And I think that there's more investigation and more conversation that needs to happen in order to get the full picture of what really went down and whether there were legal lines crossed. I don't think there's any argument here that there were some ethical boundaries pushed. So definitely finding out what happened after she went to Veterans Affairs and after she stepped down as the Veterans Affairs Minister helps to provide some clarity there. And hearing responses from people like Michael Wernick, like Jerry Butts, like Katie Telford, having them be able to fill in and color some of those pieces that are missing now.
Like, I don't know if I can just say ditto, because like basically everything that Robbie said was what I was going to say for the most part. I mean, I think we really just need to get answers and to understand what happened, and really also we have to keep in mind at this point, on Friday, the Liberal government said that they are still open to giving a deferred prosecution agreement to SNC Lavalin. So we really need to understand what happened previously, but also to really pressure our government to maybe not do that would be nice.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, in my view, that would be complete political stupidity. And strategic suicide.
Yeah.
But that being said, I kind of expect it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that, I mean, Selena Chavez, I'm going to completely screw up her last name, Chavez, she resigned. She said she's not running again today. I think we'll see a lot of maybe more Liberal MPs saying they aren't running. I mean, this is an impact on the Liberal government and their wholeness as a caucus. So I think until the Prime Minister addresses this appropriately, and also we still don't know whether or not Jody Wilson-Rayboud is going to stay in caucus or if she's still going to run for the Liberals. She said that she would, I think it was a week and a half ago. So there's a lot still to determine.
Do you see her crossing a floor?
If Jagmeet Singh hadn't won his by-election, I could totally see her going towards the NDP. I think that the Conservatives would love to have her, but their track record on Indigenous rights and the nation-to-nation relationship has been very poor. And so I don't see her going there. I was having a conversation this morning with some of my kind of political allies, and we were talking about this, and I truly, genuinely believe that Jody Wilson-Rayboud is committed to the Liberals. She's not committed to Justin Trudeau. And so I think that that's why she's still trying to stay in caucus. She's made comments, I was elected as a Liberal. It's my intention to continue to represent my constituency as a Liberal MP. And it's been interesting to see, like even with the MP Selena Cesar Chavez and some of the other cabinet ministers and MPs in the Liberal Party posting pictures of them together with Jody Wilson-Rayboud and tweeting out things in support for her. I think there's a fracture in the Liberal Party, and I don't think that there's a huge motivation on the part of Jody Wilson-Rayboud to leave the Liberal Party.
Could she lead it?
I think there's potential there. The immediate person who stands out to me, though, is Chrystia Freeland. I think she's the star.
She's the heir apparent.
Yeah, the heir apparent in my view. And I know quite a few people, even in Alberta, who identify as conservative that have said that they would vote for Chrystia Freeland if she was the Liberal leader.
Yeah, I think also, there's other opportunities for Jody Wilson-Rayboud. Perry Bellegarde is towards the end of his term in terms of leading the National Assembly of Indigenous People. So there's that as an option for her as well. There's a lot of things that she can do. I think I agree with Robbie. She's not going to cross to the Conservatives. Their reactions just in one case, in the Colton Bushy case, was not good. I can't imagine that she would feel comfortable there, that it would be aligned with her values. But again, I think that too, I don't think that the Liberals would turf Trudeau in a minute, even if it was her, Christina Freeland, or whoever else. They believe firmly, and they're probably correct, that he has at least another term in him. And that party is built on the star power of Justin Trudeau, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah.
So I don't foresee that changing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I thank you guys for coming on. How do we follow you on Twitter?
So my Twitter is at RKS Alberta.
I was like, that's short. Mine is at KRISTINRAWORTH. Kristin Raworth.
We will have to talk more about the Alberta. We're in the pre-election mode of this, but when the election is called or getting forward, I'd love to talk to you more about what's going on there, because I think it's quite fascinating, and I think will catch the eye of the entire country.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to join you then.
Right.
Absolutely.
Of course, and follow me, KEVOLE, Spreaker.com, KEVOLE, iTunes, Spotify, Facebook as well. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.